Right now, from KTAB News, your local election headquarters, this is Big Country Politics.
Thanks so much for being here. I'm Travis Ruiz. We do start our broadcast with the latest on reopening Texas. As the U.S. and the Texas start to reopen after the COVID-19 lockdown, so do the Big Country and the Heartland. Taylor County Commissioners talking about loosening restrictions during the meeting this last week, prioritizing public health and safety of residents and employees. Our Monica Diaz reports on those upcoming changes.
Thank you. As the county begins to slowly reopen,
it's just a protection mechanism.
They've decided to make some changes.
I have always felt like we're perfectly capable of having a pretty good handle on what the issues are in our community, and we can address those locally.
Taylor County Judge Downing Bowles making the final call.
What we did today is take some of the security that we've had in place over in the Plaza building off, and that'll be effective on Monday.
This decision will allow those in the Plaza building a looser entrance policy.
What we're going to do is remove the temperature station over there and the deputy that's in there screening when people come in.
Despite the lax restrictions,
we will still have the same expectations.
The judge wants people to still be cautious and understands that this process was not ideal.
The taking of temperatures is an interesting thing, and the reason why is some people feel like it's a violation of their privacy.
Commissioner for Taylor County Precinct 4, Chuck Statler, says to practice sanitary guidelines.
Use hand sanitizer, wash your hands, and just be careful that you don't make yourself susceptible to exposure to those that are carrying the virus.
Statler isn't opposed to the temperature checks.
I think we need to continue.
Sheriff Ricky Bishop says the temperature limit is 100.4 degrees.
If you have a temperature above that, you're not allowed into any of the facilities.
Bishop says they're following state protocol.
Please abide by the rules, and if you're feeling sick at all, don't come and contact the courts.
If you need to reschedule with the courts due to COVID-19, they're working with the people. In Abilene, with coverage you can count on, Monica Diaz, KTAB News.
All right, next, students, as we know, have not been inside a classroom since before spring break. And local school district officials are working to determine when they can reopen. Abilene ISD says a survey sent to parents and faculty will help in that decision making. Our Dan Booth has more in our Eye on Education.
I don't want anybody to be in a situation that they don't feel safe being in.
According to Abilene ISD Superintendent Dr. David Young, more than 2,500 parents responded to this survey, and 27% of them said they do not feel comfortable sending their kids back to school until the pandemic is over.
We're viewing this first survey as a pretest. That's our initial run of the data. It's what people think in early to mid-June 2020.
Out of over 1,200 teachers and staff who responded, 10% said they don't feel comfortable coming back yet either.
It's just as important for our employees to know and understand and be comfortable with that plan.
Abilene ISD has created a stakeholder committee of city officials, health professionals, school representatives, and parents to address safety suggestions provided by those who completed the survey.
We will take the recommendations from this committee and finish out our plan for, okay, this is what school will look like in August.
Dr. Young says community involvement is a major part of making everyone feel safe heading into next school year.
Doing this way, it's a ton of work, but we want our community's voice to be heard, and we appreciate them helping in phase one of submitting all this data for us.
For BigCountryHomepage.com, I'm Dan Booth.
All right, and according to Dr. Young, the stakeholder committee will have its first of 3 scheduled meetings on Thursday. That second survey is expected to be available to the public before the end of July. Now to our Eye on Abilene. The city of Abilene adding some new vehicles to its fleet. We're talking about some high-tech street sweepers. KTAB's Jessica Rank has the details.
Some new city wheels are hitting the pavement this week, except these ones come with a few extra bristles.
Unlike the regenerative units that we have, these units are a little more robust in the way that they should be picking up material.
We got the chance to hop in the passenger seat to see how these vehicles really work.
This one spins the side brooms faster or slower.
And while it may look like just dust blowing up here, these vehicles are actually spraying herbicide to better kill and remove plants as well as other debris blocking our gutters.
If we can pull that material up and get it as far as removed, it doesn't get into the open channels and the lakes and the streams throughout Abilene.
Hoping to pick up more than 4 tons of extra stuff just laying around.
That's enough material that would fill 2 full-size Olympic swimming pools.
And besides the environmental aspect, the city says these new vehicles will also help the roads we're all driving on. You see, when we have things like rocks, leaves, and other debris blocking our gutters when it rains, this is what causes flooding.
Once that gets saturated, we start to run into a lot of problems and issues of failure, and the most prevalent one that people see is the presence of potholes. If we can get that water away from the road, we can extend the longevity of the life of the roads.
Especially now when most key city roads are being fixed.
Yes, there's substantial cost in those street sweepers, but overall we feel the cost to benefit that we're going to derive on those is going to be substantial.
And the cost of those 4 sweepers was $1.22 million, with that money approved last November by the Abilene City Council. All right, good news about the 4th of July. It's only 3 weeks away. But the Abilene Freedom Festival is returning with food, fun, and the fireworks. Monica Diaz is here again with this story.
The Abilene Freedom Festival began with a question 3 years ago from co-chairman Kelly J.
He said, hey, can we raise X amount of dollars to bring acts in, to have fun all day, to have a kids area, to do all this?
The answer was simple.
And everybody went, yeah, I think we can.
And 3 years later,
in a town this size, A, needs great fireworks.
The event is still going on.
B, we just need to get together and, celebrate America.
Co-chairman Gary Grubbs says this event isn't on a small scale.
We were bigger than Austin, then San Antonio, then El Paso.
But for Grubbs, this year may be more important.
Our city needs this
than the rest.
It's not so much that it's a need. Our community, I believe, wants to do this.
But in order to make this happen, Rochelle Johnson with the Taylor County Expo Center says they are taking the proper safety measures.
We do have hand sanitizers up.
But in the end, she says it's what the attendee makes it.
We're just going to encourage everybody to maintain social distancing as they feel comfortable. We are not going to implement anything.
And that is for one main reason.
I think that takes away from the word freedom.
All right, tickets are available at AbileneFreedomFestival.com. We have a link to that on our website, BigCountryHomepage.com. KTAB is a proud sponsor of Abilene Freedom Festival. Still to come here on Big Country Politics, protests in Abilene. We take you to one and we hear from Governor Greg Abbott. We're back in 2 minutes.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
As more people around the world continue to speak about racial inequality in America, leaders at Abilene Christian University also joining that conversation. KTAB's Danica Hill was at ACU for the community rally this last week.
From Brianna to Ahmad to Big Floyd, it don't matter if we first responders, day joggers, community activists, doctors, lawyers, thugs, employed or the employers.
Hundreds of people filling the seats at the ACU amphitheater.
And from redlining to mass incarceration, the system in all its facets have oppressed African Americans.
The community rally hosted by the Carl Spain Center on Race Studies and Spiritual Actions.
And unless we confront it within this window of time, I believe that we will see ourselves right back here again in a way that has escalated.
Dr. Jerry Taylor is the founding director of the Carl Spain Center.
I think in order to have a healthy response, as opposed to having a reaction, one has to take what one has seen and heard and go inward.
And the purpose of the rally, calling for unity.
Something happened on the inside of me that had never happened before. Something began to turn that had never turned before. And I couldn't put a word to it. I didn't even know the feeling.
Speakers sharing their stories of understanding and empathy.
And so for all the times that I have shown privilege by the appearance of knowing, I apologize. I do not know.
Too long the black community has had to hear excuses, like it's not my fault, why should I be sorry? I'm here to say it's not my fault, but I am sorry.
In Abilene, with coverage you can count on, Danica Hill, KTAB News.
All right, of course, we stream that entire rally on bigcountryhomepage.com. We'll continue to stream those rallies and protests across the big country. All right, this last week, Texas, as you know, was in the spotlight as George Floyd was laid to rest in Houston, and our sister station, KTAL, spoke to Governor Abbott about Floyd's death and some other items. Here's that in-depth interview.
And today, the eyes of America are on Texas as funeral services for George Floyd take place today in Houston. Joining us now to talk about that and the state's ongoing response to COVID-19 is Texas Governor Greg Abbott. Governor, thanks for being with us today. You had the chance to visit Monday with the family, and following that meeting, you said his family will be the centerpiece of helping America bridge our racial divide and ensure equality. What lasting changes are you hoping will come from Floyd's death in relation to racial equity?
Sure. First, I wanted to pay my respects directly to the family of George Floyd. I knew that really the only opportunity to do that was going to be yesterday, as opposed to today, where there will just be a crush of people there. And so after visiting the church, I went to their home and had a long, a very substantive private meeting with the George Floyd family. And I got to tell you, they are a God-loving people. And they, of course, are in great sorrow and in great mourning for the loss of George Floyd, but they also understand that they have an opportunity to establish a living legacy for the death of George Floyd and the way that he died. And the way that he died is the starting point of reform in this state and in this nation, and that is there should not be anybody arrested of any color who was held under a knee of a police officer like that, and make sure that they are going to be protected from losing their life through the type of strategy that was used to detain George Floyd. But also, you mentioned in talking to the family, one thing that the family asked of me was to make sure that the family, the victims of the death of George Floyd, will be heavily involved as we move forward. So the process is not going to be hijacked by the politicians, but those who understand the challenges that we face, those who have dealt with the challenges that we face, will be the centerpiece as we craft solutions going forward that do bridge the racial divide that we have in our country.
Governor, you spoke of the reforms there with the policing tactics. What other forms of reform do you feel law enforcement needs to take, especially in communities of color?
Well, listen, there are so many in what we are doing in Texas. We are beginning conversations. We are not in a legislative session right now. Our next session begins in January, but the way this process works is that bills are filed over the course of the coming months that will be used for debate and for the crafting of laws that will be passed that I will be signing into law next May. And so that conversation begins right now, but I can tell you one example that I've heard, and that is, listen, one thing that police officers need, and all law enforcement officers need, is better training. Training before they go out on their first day, but training on an annual basis to make sure that they know exactly what the standards are, what the updates to the standards are, and make sure everybody is reminded about the correct approach when they do pull over and stop and detain someone like George Floyd, making sure that they don't use life-threatening strategies that could kill someone like what happened to George Floyd.
Governor, I want to turn our attention right now to COVID-19. Sales tax revenue funds around 57% of the state's budget. In May of this year, you saw a 13% drop in sales tax compared to 2019. What do you anticipate those numbers will be like in June now that Texas has moved into phase 3?
Listen, I would expect our sales taxes to begin to increase. It's hard to tell exactly how much. We do see still caution among consumers in Texas. We know that people want to get out, they want to engage more and be more heavily involved, but it will take a while before we see our economy back up and running the way that it was before. However, I do anticipate to see an increase in sales taxes as well as an increase in the oil and gas severance tax that we have coming into the state of Texas because of the increased price of oil.
And an emotional day in Texas. Governor Greg Abbott, we thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
All right, the day after the funeral and burial of George Floyd in Houston, lawmakers in Washington trying to decide how to deal with the claims of police misconduct. Dozens of witnesses testified before the House Judiciary Committee, demanding that Congress take action. KTAB Washington Bureau correspondent Anna Wardke has this story.
I'm tired. Holding back tears, Philonise Floyd asked lawmakers for one thing: justice for his older brother, George. I'm here to ask you to make it stop. George Floyd died in police custody after an officer knelt on Floyd's neck for nearly 9 minutes. Philonise says Congress needs to make sure law enforcement is a solution and not a problem.
The Justice and Policing Act is a legislative reconstruct to do what you've asked us to do.
Texas Democratic Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee says the bill unveiled this week would make it easier to prosecute police misconduct. It would also ban chokeholds and demilitarize police departments across the country. But Texas Republican Louis Gohmert says the bill was crafted without Republican input.
Hopefully the majority will allow more input.
Gohmert says the bill would remove funding from police departments, a claim Democrats reject.
Changes in policing must be made.
In virtual testimony, Houston Police Chief Art Acevedo told the committee that law enforcement needs to do better. But he says stripping funding is not the answer.
Underfunding the police can have disastrous consequences and hurt those most in need of our services.
Acevedo says if Congress wants to fix the problem and bring justice to George Floyd, they need to make sure funding goes directly towards improving police departments and helping get rid of the bad officers. In Washington, I'm Anna Warnicki.
And there is wide separation in America among those who support police and those calling for change. All right, still to come here on Big Country Politics, we take you to the place that had one of the first cases of COVID-19 in Abilene, how DRI is recovering. We're back in 2 minutes.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
Disability Resources Incorporated, or DRI, was the first place to have a positive COVID-19 test in Abilene. 6 would follow, including the death of a resident. The nonprofit, which serves those with intellectual disabilities, is just now getting back to normal. KTAB's Kevin Clackett, has more.
Normally, their routine included heading out and taking care of recycling.
There's a bunch of paper at a time, and the folks are able to come over, sort through it, make sure there's things that won't go through the shredder that's not supposed to.
But being one of the first places to report a COVID-19 case in Abilene,
when that first one hit, I mean, we locked it down immediately.
Keith Glover with Disability Resources says
COVID shut us down completely for probably 6 to 8 weeks.
It felt longer depending on who you ask.
Which feels like forever.
Because when your everyday life just stops.
A lot of these folks, they live by routine only. You know, that's a day, they know what they're going to do in the morning, what they're going to do at lunch, and then all of a sudden, it came to an end. So,
well, we were worried about the timelines.
Roger Caraway, Director of Operations, says COVID didn't stop them from finishing building their campus housing just when they could move in.
Right, we anticipated moving into the first house the end of March, beginning of April. Of course, that hasn't happened yet.
But ready to get some normalcy back, Keith says there won't be a second wasted when work is available again.
Just today, I had one of the guys ask, when are we going back to full time?
In Abilene, with coverage you can count on. Kevin Clack, KTAB News.
And Keith does say that they have been able to start bringing small groups in to shred and recycle paper. Very good. All right, almost immediately after the COVID-19 pandemic struck, the United States scammers started taking advantage of people selling fake miracle cures and price gouging personal protective equipment. KTAB Washington correspondent Alexandra Lamone says now there are even more sophisticated schemes.
Law enforcement officials say schemes related to the pandemic are widespread and becoming more creative.
We're also beginning to see healthcare fraud. We are seeing fraudulent billing for services not received, charges for unnecessary procedures, and fraud related to telemedicine.
Calvin Shivers with the FBI says criminals are also targeting economic relief money Congress approved in the CARES Act. Examples include using stolen identities to claim other people's unemployment benefits and taking money that's meant to help small businesses through the Paycheck Protection Program.
Fraudsters
misrepresenting their small business or the characteristics of their small business, or misrepresenting that there's a small business at all.
California Senator Dianne Feinstein worries that authorities don't know the full scope of the problem
and what it's going to take to stop it. I've never seen anything like it. It's a program riddled with fraud.
If you put $3 trillion out there, people will take advantage of it. And I'll share your frustration. It's been a lot of generalities here. We'd like to know, what can we do, what's going on, who's doing it, how widespread is it?
The Department of Justice created a unit to investigate fraud related to the pandemic. So far, law enforcement agencies say they've identified hundreds of millions of dollars in potential fraud. In Washington, Alexandra Limon.
The FBI and other agencies are promising to prosecute criminals who stole from the government and from American citizens. All right, still to come here on Big Country Politics, a stranger's picture and a reunion. A story you do not want to miss.
Big Country Politics on KTAB continues.
Welcome back. A picture is worth 1,000 words, and an interesting one taken at the Abilene Regional Airport has an even more interesting story. Here's KTAB's Mercedes Hernandez.
For photographer Morgan McDuff, Saturday was just another day of capturing memories for clients.
A wife and her husband. Her husband had been deployed for 8 months, and she just wanted pictures of the homecoming.
But at the Abilene Regional Airport, something else caught her eye.
We see this young girl, she comes and hugs her mom, and they're crying. Out comes this other girl.
That girl was Jenny Gilbert's daughter, Stevie, who she hadn't seen in over a year. Gilbert says she was picking up her daughter, Chelsea, and had no idea Stevie was with her.
You know, when I looked at her, it was like I recognized her, but in my mind, I was like, you're in Georgia.
McDuff caught the entire reunion on camera, but there was just one problem.
I was going to catch her at baggage claim, but she ended up leaving before I could find out who she was or anything.
So McDuff took to social media, where just a few hours later, she found Jenny.
One of the ladies that works with me saw it, and she sent it to my friend and said, is this Jenny? My friend was like, yes, it is.
For Gilbert, the pictures were more than a memory caught on camera. They were a supreme act of kindness from a total stranger.
She didn't have to take the pictures. She didn't have to want to try to find you to send you the couple more that she had, you know, but she did.
The Gilberts are very thankful, but McGuff says she was simply putting herself in another mother's shoes.
You know, as a mom, I would want pictures, you know, of something like that.
With everything that's going on in the world, it was just so nice to see someone doing something with kindness.
Kindness, gotta love that. That does it for this week's edition of Big Country Politics. For the latest political headlines, you know where to go, bigcountryhomepage.com. We'll see you next week, same time, same place. Thank you so much for watching.